There is a certain kind of exhaustion that has no name. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't announce itself with tears or breakdowns or anything the world would recognize as collapse. It settles quietly, the way dust settles on a shelf. And one ordinary afternoon, you look up and realize you had been holding something so long that your hands have forgotten how to open. This is the emotional cost of always having to be strong. Not the strength that is chosen, but the kind that was assigned quietly. Long before you were old enough to understand what was being asked of you, somewhere in early life, certain children receive an unspoken signal. The environment around them becomes unpredictable, financially, emotionally, or relationally, and in that instability, a message is transmitted without words. Someone needs to hold things together, and without anyone volunteering, without anyone even realizing it, the child steps forward, not out of courage, but out of necessity. Psychologists who study early emotional development have noted that when children are consistently exposed to environments where emotional regulation is absent in the adults around them, they often begin to suppress their own emotional needs in order to manage the emotional climate of the household. This is not a choice made consciously. It is survival logic operating beneath awareness. If this perspective resonates, you can support the video by liking it. The child who learns to be strong early is often the child who stops crying quickly, not because they feel less, but because they learn that their tears add to the weight in the room. They become fluent in other people's silences. They develop a preternatural sensitivity to mood shifts, the way a parent's footstep sounds when something is wrong, the particular quality of a pause before difficult news. This sensitivity, while adaptive in childhood, carries a long psychological shadow. Research in developmental psychology suggests that children who adopt caretaking roles early, whether emotional, practical, or social, often experience what is called a compression of the self, their own inner world. Their fears and longings and confusion gets folded inward to make room for others. The self doesn't disappear. It simply learns to wait, and it keeps waiting, sometimes for decades. Comment strong if this describes your experience. There is a particular kind of loneliness that lives inside people who were always considered the strong one. It is the loneliness of being needed but never truly known, of being depended upon but rarely protected, of holding space for others while quietly wondering if anyone would ever do the same for you. This loneliness is difficult to articulate because, from the outside, everything looks fine. You function. You are reliable, you show up, and so the world rewards you with more responsibility, more trust, more weight, never suspecting that beneath the composure there is something quietly aching. The psychological literature on emotional suppression draws an important distinction between genuine emotional resilience and what might be called performed stability. Resilience is the ability to process difficult emotions and recover from them. Performed stability is the ability to suppress emotional expression so effectively that neither you nor the people around you can easily access what you actually feel. Children who grow up needing to be strong often become adults who are extraordinarily skilled at the latter, while having had very little practice with the former. Type YES. If this helped you understand something about yourself. This distinction matters because the body keeps a ledger. Emotional suppression, sustained over long periods, is associated in psychological research with elevated physiological stress responses. The work of keeping the surface calm while the interior remains unprocessed takes energy, metabolic, neurological, relational energy. Over time, this creates a kind of chronic depletion that is difficult to trace back to its source because it masquerades as personality. You think you are simply someone who doesn't need much, someone who handles things, someone who is, by nature, composed. But there is a difference between being composed and having been taught that falling apart was never an option. Adults who carried early emotional burdens often find that intimacy presents a unique and confusing challenge. When someone offers genuine care, something in them tightens rather than relaxes. Being seen in vulnerability, the very thing they quietly longed for, can feel threatening. Psychologists who study attachment describe this as a learned association between emotional openness and danger. The nervous system, trained in an environment where showing need led to more burden rather than less, begins to treat vulnerability as a risk rather than a relief. If someone you know might benefit from this, feel free to share it. There is also the question of identity. When strength becomes the primary way someone has been valued, when being needed is the primary way they have experienced belonging, the prospect of laying that strength down becomes existentially frightening. Who are you if you are not the one holding things together? What remains when you stop managing, fixing, anticipating? For many people who have lived inside this pattern for most of their lives, this is not a philosophical question. It is a visceral one, felt somewhere beneath the sternum, in the place where old fears keep their residence. Specialists in trauma-informed psychology use the term emotional labor to describe the ongoing work of managing one's feelings in service of a social or relational environment. What is less often discussed is how early and how completely some people are recruited into this labor, not as adults in a professional context, but as children in what should have been a protected space. The emotional labor of a child who has learned to be the stable presence in an unstable home is not incidental. It is structural. It reorganizes development around a function rather than a self. If this gave you clarity, comment resilient below. And yet, and this is perhaps the most important thing, none of this is permanent architecture. The patterns established in early life are real, and they are powerful, but they are not fixed identity. Neuroscience and psychological research consistently suggest that the brain retains plasticity in its relational and emotional processing well into adulthood. Patterns that were learned can, slowly, and with the right conditions, be revised, not erased, revised. The child who learned to hold everything together doesn't need to become someone who holds nothing. They need the gradual experience of being in environments where their own emotional presence is not just tolerated but welcomed. This tends to begin not with insight, though understanding matters, but with small repeated experiences of being allowed to be uncertain, to be tired, to be unfinished without consequence. Each time that happens, without the expected cost, something in the nervous system updates its model of the world. Perhaps here it is safe to have needs. Perhaps here being human is not a liability. Strength, genuinely chosen, is one of the most quietly beautiful things a person can embody. But strength that was never given a choice, strength demanded of a small person before they had the language or resources to consent, carries a cost that deserves acknowledgement, not to create victimhood, but to create understanding. But understanding is where the weight begins to lighten. If this reached something quiet in you, consider liking the video. It helps more people find their way here. And in the comments, leave a reflection. What is one thing you were expected to carry early in life that you only now beginning to set down. Whatever comes to mind, it is worth saying. Finally, if you find value in this kind of slow, honest exploration of the human interior, consider subscribing to Unnoticed Human, a space built not for noise, but for the things inside people that rarely get to be spoken.